At 6 a.m. on April 19, 2014, at a karaoke bar in Useong District, Daejeon City, three young men and a high school girl were still hanging around after a night of drinking and chatting. As the alcohol took effect, one of them suddenly asked if there was a quick way to make money. That single question would mark the beginning of a horrifying chain of events. In the room at that time were 25-year-old Lee Jae-geun, 24-year-old Jeong-bin, 24-year-old Lee Nam-dong, and 15-year-old high school student Yang Jong-won. Throughout the night, they drank soju mixed with beer and shared personal stories, talking about past relationships, high school memories, drunken misadventures, and youthful mistakes. But as they got more intoxicated, the atmosphere shifted. One of the men complained that they were running out of money and asked if there was any way to quickly make a large amount of cash without much effort. Without hesitation, Yang Jong-won suggested an idea. She said that a 45-year-old man named Kim had previously paid her for a private meeting and that he was wealthy. The story immediately excited the three men, and they began plotting to exploit that relationship by setting a trap and forcing Mr. Kim to hand over money. They agreed on a specific plan. Once Yang Jong-won arranged to meet Mr. Kim and learned which motel room he was staying in, she would leave the door unlocked. Then the group would rush in and overpower him while he was off guard. To initiate the plan, Yang called Mr. Kim shortly afterward and agreed to meet privately for a payment of $73. Around 6:40 a.m., Yang arrived at the motel and met with Mr. Kim as planned. While he was in the bathroom, she quickly texted the room number to the group and left the door unlocked, just as they had discussed. Within minutes, the three young men stormed into the room, surrounded Mr. Kim, and immediately began to assault him. Initially, they had only planned to use force to extort money, but Mr. Kim resisted more fiercely than expected. At first, he panicked, but once he realized it was a setup, he firmly refused all demands. The situation quickly spiraled out of control as the argument escalated into a violent struggle. Losing patience, the group dragged Mr. Kim out of the motel and continued beating him on the street, targeting his head. At one point, Jeong-bin used a 44-pound plastic bucket to strike him, rendering Mr. Kim unconscious. Instead of stopping, they kicked him in the head, trying to force him to wake up. Yang Jong-won stood nearby, silently watching without intervening. It didn't end there. The group loaded the still unconscious Mr. Kim into a car and left the scene. They drove around Daejeon City for about 30 minutes, hoping he would regain consciousness. Around 10:30 a.m., Mr. Kim slowly came to in a dazed state, clearly sensing his life was in danger, and began pleading for mercy. Despite his begging, the group continued to beat him mercilessly and forced him to reveal his credit card PIN. But soon after, Mr. Kim died in the car due to severe trauma and the prolonged assault. Terrified by what they had done, the group abandoned his body in the vehicle, then fled the scene with his credit card, gold bracelet, watch, and phone. Taking advantage of the time before the body was discovered, the group quickly withdrew money and sold off all the stolen belongings, collecting a total of over $2,200. With that money, they planned to buy a car and escape from Daejeon. However, before the plan could be carried out, police found the body inside the car. A manhunt was immediately launched, and within a short time, all the suspects were arrested. Shortly after their arrest, the four individuals, Lee Jae-geun, Jeong-bin, Lee Nam-dong, and Yang Jong-won, were taken into custody for investigation and underwent a series of intense interrogations. During questioning, police examined Yang Jong-won's phone and discovered a deleted voice recording, which was successfully recovered. Notably, the recording was made on April 12th, just 1 week before the murder. Although parts of the audio were disrupted, Yang Jong-won's voice was clearly audible. She mentioned someone named Yoon Ji-soo, saying that this person was dead, the body would soon be moved, everyone needed to leave that place, and that she was also planning to disappear. Another voice followed, sounding panicked and confused, not understanding anything about a dead body or the name Yoon Ji-soo. This clue led police to begin reviewing missing persons reports from around the time of the murder. They discovered that all four suspects were originally from Gimhae City, Gyeongsangnam Province, even though the crime had occurred in Daejeon. Upon contacting local authorities, they received a significant lead. On March 30th, a 16-year-old girl named Yoon Ji-soo had been reported missing by her family. The name matched exactly with the one mentioned in the recovered voice message. Following this lead, investigators widened the scope of their case to include the disappearance of Yoon Ji-soo. Under interrogation, Yang Jong-won began to waver and claimed that the three men were the actual perpetrators, while she had only participated under pressure. According to her, the body had been buried on a mountain near Hwangyo Bridge. Based on this information, authorities launched a search in the area. Nearly 2 weeks after the four suspects were arrested, on May 2, 2014, the remains of 16-year-old Yoon Ji-soo were found on a mountain near Hwangyo Bridge in Changneung County, Gyeongsangnam Province. When the body was exhumed, it was found encased in a thick layer of concrete. It took investigators several hours to separate the remains from the hardened material. Upon peeling back the final layer, they discovered that the victim's body was charred and severely disfigured. The scene was so gruesome that some officers couldn't bring themselves to look directly at it. Nearly 2 months earlier, on March 3, 2014, the start of the new school year, Ji-soo had moved to Gimhae City to live with her biological father after her family had separated. At first, she was cheerful about starting school, but soon struggled with isolation. Being from a different region, she was alienated by her classmates. Despite trying to fit in, Ji-soo was treated like an outsider and gradually became isolated for not being able to speak the Gyeongsang dialect. It was during a time when Ji-soo felt distant and disconnected from those around her that she met 24-year-old Kim Gyu-min through social media. He came across as warm, kind, and always willing to listen to her stories. To 16-year-old Ji-soo, Kim Gyu-min felt like a kind older brother, someone she quickly came to trust and found herself drawn to. On March 15th, 2 weeks before she was reported missing, Ji-soo met Kim Gyu-min after school. He invited her for a drive, saying he would take her to the beach so she could relax and feel better. Ji-soo agreed and left home feeling excited. They headed toward Busan City, but while Ji-soo thought it was just a short trip, Kim had absolutely no intention of bringing her back. Instead of taking her to the beach as promised, Kim brought Ji-soo to a remote motel where Jeong-bin, someone Kim had previously mentioned as a close friend, was already waiting. Once there, Kim handed Ji-soo over to Jeong-bin without hesitation. After receiving his payment, he walked away without looking back. When Ji-soo entered the motel room at Jeong-bin's call, she saw 4 high school girls and 2 older men inside. These 2 men were Lee Jae-geun and Lee Nam-dong, both of whom would later be confirmed as key figures in the Daejeon case. Among the girls were Yang Jong-won, Heo Ji-soo, 14, Jung Ji-yeon, and Yang Jun-hwa, 15. Although they claimed to be providing shelter, the men were in fact controlling the girls and forcing them to follow orders. From that point forward, Ji-soo was kept inside the motel, repeatedly threatened, and strictly forbidden from resisting. At the same time, Lee Jae-geun and Lee Nam-dong began setting up a money-making operation through anonymous chat apps. They targeted middle-aged men, people easier to manipulate to avoid complications. All profits were kept under the control of Lee and Nam-dong directly. While the group's illegal activities continued, at 9 p.m. on March 29th, Kim Gyu-min, the man who had sold Ji-soo, made an urgent phone call to the others. Ji-soo's father had reported her missing, and the police had begun an investigation. Because Kim had a history of messaging Ji-soo online, he was quickly identified and became the first person the police started monitoring. This news caused panic among the remaining group members. They realized that hiding in Busan was no longer possible, and it was only a matter of time before the police uncovered their prostitution ring. As a result, Lee Jae-geun, Heo Jeong-bin, and Lee Nam-dong decided to release Ji-soo on the strict condition that she never speak about what had happened. Not long after returning home, Ji-soo remained almost completely silent. But her father immediately noticed something was off. His daughter was anxious and overly cautious, flinching whenever someone touched her. She smelled like cigarette smoke and had several bruises on her body. Trusting his instincts, he suspected she might have been involved in something criminal. After a long period of patience and encouragement, he finally learned the horrifying truth that his daughter had been kidnapped, assaulted, and forced into prostitution. Though he was filled with rage, Jisoo's father managed to stay calm and listen to her story until the very end. After learning everything that had happened, he wanted to go to the police immediately, but Jisoo pleaded to visit the church first to pray. The next day at 1 p.m., the two went to their usual church. Since they prayed in different sections, they briefly separated. As Jisoo walked alone to the adjoining chapel, she felt uneasy, as if someone was watching her. At that exact moment, Yang Junhwa and Yang Jongwon, two runaway girls from the same group, suddenly appeared. Somehow, they had found out that Jisoo had confessed everything to her father. Without hesitation, they grabbed her hands and dragged her away in front of him. Before he could react, his daughter had vanished. He rushed to the Gimhae City police station to report the incident, desperately pleading for help, but officers told him they had to follow protocol and advised him to return home and wait. With no other options, the father decided to search for his daughter himself. Recalling that Jisoo had once mentioned being held in a motel in Busan, he immediately set out, going from one lodging to another across hundreds of locations, asking questions. He also visited a Busan police station for help, but they refused to take the case, claiming jurisdiction belonged to the Central Police in Gimhae and told him to report it there. While he searched hopelessly for clues in Busan, Jisoo had already been transported to Ulsan City, where she was being held captive. The group accused her of betrayal and began forcing her into prostitution as revenge. Previously, Jisoo had been made to serve 4 clients a week. Now, she was forced to have sex with an average of 3 men per day. On some days, she was forced to service over 8 clients, bringing the group as much as $870 in a single day. Jisoo's situation grew even more horrific as she was subjected to constant beatings, not just daily, but with increasing brutality. On April 4th, she secretly tried to access Facebook but was caught. A violent group assault followed. From that moment, the group began taking shifts to guard Jisoo 24/7. After police raids made them feel unsafe in Ulsan, the group decided to relocate to various motels in Daegu. Over time, the abuse escalated to sadistic levels. They began treating the beatings as a form of entertainment. They mocked Jisoo, telling her that if she fought another girl and won, they would let her go free. The violence only intensified. They repeatedly struck her neck and other vulnerable areas. When she collapsed, they beat her with electric fans. Among them, Jeong-bin was the most sadistic. He would pour 3 bottles of soju into a bowl, force her to drink it all, then make her get on her knees and lick up her vomit from the floor. It didn't stop there. Whenever Jisoo, exhausted and dehydrated, begged for water, he would boil water in a coffee pot and pour it directly onto her body. Even as she cried and begged for mercy, the group watched without any emotion. They even ordered the other girls to take turns pouring boiling water on her. As a result, Jisoo suffered severe burns across multiple areas of her body. Under the relentless abuse from March 30th to April 9th, Jisoo's body rapidly deteriorated. Her esophagus stopped functioning, leaving her unable to swallow food. As her condition became visibly critical, her abusers began to panic. So, around 10 p.m. on April 9th, 2 men, Jae-geun and Jeong-bin, along with 2 schoolgirls, Jeong-ji-yeon and Ji-soo, placed Jisoo in a car. While driving, they wandered through Daegu before stopping in a deserted industrial area in Dalseo district. There, they started a card game with a cruel rule. The loser had to beat Jisoo as punishment. At one point, her stomach pain became unbearable, and Jisoo asked to step out of the car. She struggled to walk toward a nearby public restroom. Meanwhile, the others paid little attention, immersed in their game and confident she couldn't possibly escape in her condition. It was already late at night, the streets were empty, and no one was around. After finishing the game, they continued to assault her and then drove back to the motel. While the car was still moving through the night, Jeong-bin mockingly turned to Jisoo and asked who she would take with her if she died. Jisoo hesitated for a moment, but when pressured to answer, she pointed at Lee Jae-geun. Enraged, Lee began beating her mercilessly. The assault only stopped when they arrived at the motel parking lot. At around 12:30 a.m. on April 10th, Jisoo suddenly stopped breathing. Her heart had gone into cardiac arrest while she was still lying in the back seat. It was only then that the group realized how serious the situation had become, and they focused on disposing of her body. By 4 a.m., they transported her remains to a secluded orchard in Daeji-myeon, Changnyeong District, Gyeongsang Province. At the site, around 2 a.m., Lee Jae-geun and Jeong-bin used a shovel and a hoe to dig a grave. Meanwhile, Jong Ji-yeon and Ji-soo used their phones as flashlights. Once the hole was ready, they dumped Jisoo's body inside, poured gasoline over it, and set it on fire. A few hours later, after returning to the motel, the group grew nervous that someone might discover the body. They realized that April was planting season. Orchard workers would be spraying pesticides, applying fertilizer, removing old trees, and planting new ones. This made them fear that the remains might soon be uncovered. That anxiety pushed them to move the body again. To carry out this second disposal, all 7 accomplices participated: Lee Jae-geun, Jeong-bin, Lee Nam-dong, and the 4 high school girls, Jong Ji-yeon, Ji-soo, Yang Junhwa, and Yang Jong-won. They even brought cement to carry out their new plan. This information was later recovered from Yang Jong-won's phone. In the early morning hours of April 14th at around 2 a.m., the group returned to the orchard, dug up the remains, and transported them to a mountain. As before, the girls held their phones to light the scene while the 3 men handled the burial. They poured a cement mixture over the body and then covered it with rocks and soil to conceal it. However, in their haste, they accidentally dropped a car key at the site, which forced them to call a tow truck for help. Thanks to that call, the tow truck driver formed a clear impression of the group. They told him they had been fishing, that one of them had dropped their car key into the lake and asked to be taken to Daegu City. According to the driver, they just seemed like a group of young people hanging out, nothing suspicious. But the truth couldn't have been more different. After that, they wandered from one motel to another for a week, eventually arriving in Daejeon City, where they committed even more crimes before finally being caught by police. The initial investigation revealed that all 7 individuals were swiftly indicted by the prosecution on 22 charges. These included murder, assault, theft, bodily harm, luring minors, prostitution, and kidnapping. One particularly enraging detail also came to light during the expanded investigation. Before Jisoo was murdered, one of the offenders, Lee Jae-geun, had actually been brought in by police. However, at the time, officers released Lee Jae-geun due to insufficient evidence. Records show he had a staggering 25 prior convictions, including physically assaulting family members and forcing minors into prostitution. In one case, after his father refused to buy him a car, he turned on his mother and stabbed her in the abdomen. He had also once locked up a friend's younger sister and forced her into sex work. Regarding the specific charges, the trial was held in 2 locations. For the robbery and murder of 40-year-old Kim in Daejeon, 4 individuals, Lee Jae-geun, Jeong-bin, Lee Nam-dong, and Yang Jong-won, were tried at the Daejeon High Court. Meanwhile, Yang Junhwa, Ji-soo, and Jong Ji-yeon, the 3 directly involved in Jisoo's death, were tried at the Changwon District Court. In the Changwon trial, Ji-soo and Jong Ji-yeon, who not only took part in the assault but stood by during Jisoo's death and helped dispose of her body, were each sentenced to 7 years in long-term prison. Yang Junhwa, identified as the most brutal among the girls toward Jisoo, received a harsher sentence: 6 years in short-term prison and 9 years long-term. In the consideration of mitigating circumstances, the panel of judges acknowledged that all 3 defendants had previously been victims themselves before being drawn into the chain of criminal acts. Before Jisoo was kidnapped, they had already been living with the group and had been beaten and forced into night labor by Lee Jae-geun, Jeong-bin, and Lee Nam-dong. Evidence also indicated that they may have been threatened during the body disposal. After Jisoo's death, the violence continued, with all 4 girls being forced into prostitution for over 10 hours a day without rest. However, the court also determined that not all their crimes were committed under coercion. While their initial involvement was driven by fear, over time, some of their actions became voluntary. In particular, Yang Junhwa engaged in an especially brutal level of violence. Meanwhile, the Daejeon trial was even more intense. After 3 rounds of hearings, Jeong-bin was sentenced to life in prison and ordered to wear an electronic ankle monitor for 30 years. Lee Nam-dong received a 35-year prison sentence. As for Yang Jung-won, since she was still a minor at the time, she was sentenced to 13 years and 6 months in prison. As for Lee Jae-geun, the defendant identified as the ringleader, he was scheduled to stand trial again under the Anti-Organized Crime Act in connection with the Daejeon murder case. However, just before the trial began, the Constitutional Court ruled the law unconstitutional, resulting in the case being dismissed. Ultimately, during his appeal, Lee Jae-geun was sentenced to life in prison for murdering the victim in order to steal their belongings. Around the same time, Kim Gyu-min, the man who sold Jisoo to the criminal group, was also sentenced to 3 years in prison. When the full story of the high school girl's murder in Gimhae City came to light, the city's central police station faced widespread public outrage. They were heavily criticized for downplaying the father's missing person report and only launching a formal investigation after Jisoo was already dead. As time passed, by the year 2025, all of the female offenders had completed their prison sentences, except for Lee Jae-geun and Lee Nam-dong. Jeong-bin was confirmed to have died from illness while in prison in January 2025. The schoolgirls who once stood trial are now in their 20s, the very age Jisoo would have reached had she still been alive. Less than a year after Jisoo's death, another case quietly emerged, but this time, the scene wasn't in a city, but on a remote mountain. On the morning of June 6, 2019, on a mountainside in Osan, Gyeonggi Province, workers were clearing out an old family cemetery. The site had been neglected for years, so the crew began work early to avoid the midday heat. While everyone was focused on their tasks, a voice suddenly called out from the hillside. When the others ran over, they were stunned into silence. Lying beneath a thin layer of soil was a naked human skeleton. Forensic analysis revealed it was the body of a teenage boy, approximately 15 to 17 years old. Although the identity remained unknown, one detail stood out to the experts. The victim's teeth were in extremely poor condition. That clue raised immediate concerns about the boy's life before death. According to specialists, he may have suffered from long-term neglect or lived in extremely harsh conditions. Even more alarming were the injuries to his face. His cheekbone had been fractured, and there was severe internal bleeding in his nasal cavity. These are injuries typically caused by intense blunt force trauma. As a result, the preliminary cause of death was determined to be physical violence. Given the severity of the evidence, police launched an expanded investigation to uncover the victim's identity. They issued a search warrant to compare records and began reviewing cases of runaway youth and students who had dropped out for extended periods in the Greater Seoul area. They also checked individuals who had never received a national ID card. The initial list contained over 38,000 names. After narrowing it down, only 4 cases remained unresolved, people whose whereabouts and activities couldn't be confirmed during the time of the crime. What truly caught investigators' attention was a photo they discovered while reviewing the social media profiles of these individuals, a ring worn by one of them in their profile picture. From that single clue, investigators compared the physical evidence collected at the scene, including a ring and a pair of earrings, with images found online. To their surprise, one of the 4 missing teens had previously posted a photo wearing a ring identical to the one found. That boy was Song, 17 years old. Notably, he had lost all contact with his family in September 2018, around 9 months before the body was discovered. It didn't stop there. Police reviewed more personal photos on Song's social media and found another match. He had once worn a pair of earrings with the exact same design as those recovered from the scene. At that point, it became increasingly likely that the victim was Song. Police immediately contacted his father and requested a DNA sample. The test confirmed that the remains indeed belonged to Song. Further investigation gradually uncovered details about Song's life. He had run away from home and, after dropping out of school, lived intermittently at various youth shelters. In September 2018, he suddenly cut off all contact. Though his friends searched everywhere, there was no trace of him. In fact, some even began to speculate that he may have been kidnapped and murdered. The deeper police dug, the more suspicious the case became. Before his disappearance, Song had expressed fears that someone was threatening him. A friend recalled that he was constantly on edge and often said he felt like he was being followed. Staff members at the youth shelter had also noticed his growing anxiety. In one particularly panicked moment, Song mentioned a name that filled him with dread: Lee Seon-sang. Following that lead, police examined Song's social media contacts and found a group of individuals linked to someone named Lee Seon-sang. All of them listed their workplace as Lee Seon-sang, including three 22-year-old men named Kim, Byun, and Choi. Within the runaway youth community, this group had a reputation as dangerous manipulators who preyed on vulnerable teens to control and exploit them. Upon reviewing their records, police discovered that Kim and Byun had previously been arrested for unrelated crimes. Specifically, they were caught transporting passbooks and bank cards that were not registered under their names, items commonly used in telephone scams. As for Choi, he was currently serving his mandatory military duty and had no prior criminal record. The investigation gained momentum when officers located a villa in Guro district, believed to be a base of operations where the group handled unauthorized bank accounts for voice phishing schemes. The organization behind it was identified as Lee Seon-sang, with Kim, Byun, and Choi serving as core members. Their tactic was to lure runaway teens with promises of protection and financial support, only to coerce them into committing fraud and trafficking drugs. Several former members reported that, at first, life within the group felt comforting. For runaways with nowhere else to turn, rejecting help from Lee Seon-sang was extremely difficult. The group offered food, shelter, and a sense of belonging. Song, too, lived with them, and once told those around him that the conditions were pretty good and that he felt safe there. Over time, things stopped feeling safe. These so-called older brothers began to show their true colors. They told Song that since he had received help from them, it was now time to repay the favor. Under mounting psychological pressure and emotional manipulation, Song gradually lost the ability to resist. They took advantage of this by taking nude photos of him, sexually harassing him, beating him, and making threats. If he didn't comply with their demands, they said they would leak the photos online. In a moment of desperation, Song decided to go to the police and report them. Even though he had run away from home and was living far from his family, he didn't want to fall into a life of crime. Thanks to that decision, he escaped the grip of the Lee Seon-sang group and was transferred to a youth protection center. But even then, he was not entirely safe. Staff members there noted that strange men would often be seen lurking near the facility, seemingly watching Song. Fearing that he might be captured again or face retaliation, Song was forced to move repeatedly between shelters. A week before he went missing, he left one center and stayed at the home of someone he knew. According to that acquaintance's statement, Song disappeared on September 8, 2018. That day, he said he was going to meet a friend who was a tattoo artist and would be back later. But after that, no one ever heard from him again. When he didn't return, the acquaintance grew concerned and tried calling and texting him, but got no response. That same day, Song had received a message from a friend, referred to as A, asking him to meet at Osan Station to see a tattoo artist. Suspecting nothing, Song went with A. But it was all a trap. When they arrived, Byun was waiting, pretending to be the tattoo artist. He grabbed Song and dragged him to a factory in Naisan-dong, where Kim and Choi, the other group members, were already waiting. At that factory, all three brutally beat Song with a shovel. The attack was so violent that he eventually died from his injuries. They buried his body in a nearby mountain. Even more disturbing, they took photos of the crime scene and later showed them off as if it were some kind of accomplishment. To cover their tracks, the group transported all the weapons and tools they had used in a car and dumped them elsewhere. Once they were done, they abandoned the vehicle and fled the scene. Fortunately, the next day, a local resident found the car. But since there were no obvious signs of foul play, it was simply towed to a nearby impound lot, where it sat untouched for an entire year. It wasn't until Song's remains were discovered that the case exploded into public view, and Kim, the registered owner of the car, quickly became a prime suspect. When the abandoned vehicle was examined, a key piece of evidence was found: Song's blood. Kim and Byun, who had already been in custody for unrelated charges, were interrogated again, and this time, they confessed to everything. Kim even admitted that before the murder, he had gone out and bought the shovel and gloves specifically to carry it out. Their motive wasn't just personal resentment. The group believed that if Song hadn't gone to the police, they never would have been targeted by law enforcement. So, they decided he had to die. It turned out that when Song escaped the group in June 2018, he had provided police with detailed information about their criminal operations, including saved telegram messages exchanged between him and the gang. Even after committing murder, the group continued living as if nothing had happened. During that time, one of the accomplices, Choi, even enlisted in the military. Few would have suspected that there was yet another participant, friend A, the person who had lured Song into the Lee Seonsang group. Her testimony became a key piece of evidence when she admitted to accepting money in exchange for bringing Song to the group and witnessing him being beaten unconscious before leaving the scene. Looking deeper into how this group operated, it became clear that Lee Seonsang made every effort to cover its tracks. They detained and used violence to tightly control any runaway youths, like Song, who tried to leave. When Song reported them to the police and exposed their criminal activities, the group saw him as a traitor who had to be eliminated. Once the case came to light, public outrage only intensified with how the group members responded. Even after killing Song, Kim and Byun continued running voice phishing scams until they were finally arrested. Meanwhile, friend A, who had set the trap, remained completely silent and refused to testify without a lawyer present. At the initial trial in February 2020, prosecutors demanded life sentences for Kim and Byun, the main perpetrators. However, the court ultimately sentenced Kim to 30 years in prison and Byun to 25 years. Choi, since he was an active-duty soldier, was tried in a military court and received 30 years as well. In addition, the group was ordered to wear electronic ankle monitors for 20 years. As for A, since she was still a minor at the time, she was sent to a juvenile reformatory. What's more troubling is that during the nearly 1 year that Song was missing, no one came forward to report it or look for him. Song often said that no one in his family cared about him, that he lived a life of total abandonment. According to staff at the youth shelter, protecting runaway teens requires the guardian's consent. But in Song's case, none of his legal guardians could be contacted. Worse still, even after Song's death, his family reached a settlement with the offenders and accepted financial compensation, ultimately contributing to the reduction of their sentences. It's unclear what feelings led the family to settle, but the result was clear. Those responsible for his death were not held fully accountable. The cases of Song and Jisoo aren't just tragedies of two individuals. They expose a systemic failure to protect vulnerable youth. When no one listens, when no one acts in time, evil can grow quietly in the shadows. These criminals disguised themselves as family, yet carried out the cruelest acts imaginable. And the victims, despite crying out for help, were ultimately abandoned in despair. What do you think about this case? Let us know in the comments below, and if you found this video impactful, don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next story.